The rain came down like it had somewhere urgent to be. And so did the black sedan idling outside Cedars Grove Medical Center at 11:40 at night. Amara Bankole ran through it anyway, one hand clutching her cardigan shut, the other gripping a phone with a cracked screen and a voicemail from her landlord she still hadn't listened to. She yanked open the back door, started to apologize for being late, and froze. The driver wasn't looking at his phone. He was looking at her in the rearview mirror like he already knew her name. "You're not late," he said quietly. "I was early." She didn't think anything of it. Not yet. She had no way of knowing that the man in the gray hoodie with the scarred knuckles and the thermos of black coffee was worth $11 billion. Or that, in exactly 6 days, someone would try to kill him for it. All she knew, climbing into the back seat with rain in her lashes, was that she was exhausted in the particular way that comes from loving people who need more than you have left to give a mother whose memory was leaving her in pieces, and a 6-year-old daughter asleep in a stranger's guest room because Amara couldn't afford a sitter past 9. "Thank you for waiting," she murmured and closed her eyes. "If you're watching this tonight, tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if stories like this one keep you up past your bedtime, hit subscribe and like the video because you will not want to miss what happens next." His name, as far as she knew, was Min. Just Min, no surname on the app, a 4.9 star rating, and a habit of driving 10 miles under the speed limit on wet roads that made her trust him instantly, the way you trust a man who seems to be protecting something more careful than a fare. What she couldn't have known was that 3 hours earlier, the real Kang Min-jun, heir to the Kang Jin-woo conglomerate, a shipping and biotech empire that stretched from Busan to Long Beach, had walked out of a boardroom mid-sentence, taken off a watch worth more than her apartment building, and disappeared into a rented studio in Koreatown under a name that belonged to no one. His family thought he was in Seoul. His fiancée, a woman he had never once chosen, only inherited, the way he'd inherited everything else, believed he was recovering from exhaustion at a private clinic. In truth, he had spent the last 4 months driving strangers through Los Angeles at night, because it was the only place left in his life where nobody wanted anything from him. "Long day?" he asked, glancing at her in the mirror. "Every day," she said, and then laughed at herself, embarrassed. "Sorry. You didn't ask for my life story." "I did actually," he said. "I asked how your day was. That usually comes with the life story attached." She looked up at that. There was something in the way he said it, unhurried, unbothered by silence, like a man who had learned to listen because so few people had ever really listened to him. She found herself telling him about her mother's early-onset dementia, about the good days that were getting rarer, about a 6-year-old named Zuri who still believed her mommy hung the moon even though the moon hadn't been paying rent. She told a stranger more in 11 minutes than she told her own sister in 11 months, and she didn't understand why until much later, when she learned that Min had spent his whole life being lied to by people who wanted something from him, and had gotten disturbingly good at spotting the one thing rarer than money: a person who wanted nothing. He pulled up outside her apartment building, the kind with a buzzer that hadn't worked since spring and a porch light that flickered like it was deciding whether her block deserved illumination at all. "This isn't a safe drop-off point," he said, frowning at the dark stairwell. "It's home," she said simply, the way people say things they've stopped questioning. He didn't drive off until she was inside. She noticed that. She would think about that detail again in a week, when everything she believed about him detonated in her hands. 2 nights later, she booked the same car without meaning to. The app simply matched her, the way it does. Blind chance dressed up as fate, and this time he had a coffee waiting in the cup holder for her. Black, no sugar, exactly how she liked it, though she hadn't told him. "How did you? You mentioned it," he said. "The first night. You said the hospital coffee tastes like punishment." Nobody remembered the small things she said. Not anymore. Her mother forgot her face some mornings. Her sister forgot to call. Zuri was 6 and remembered everything, but needed her mother to remember for her, not the other way around. And here was a driver, a stranger in a hoodie, filing away a stray complaint about hospital coffee like it mattered. It shouldn't have mattered so much. But it did, and that was the problem, because Amara Bankole had promised herself, after Zuri's father left without so much as a note, that she would never again let a man's kindness convince her he was safe. She didn't know yet that the danger in this story wasn't him. It was everyone circling him. By the fourth ride, she'd stopped pretending she was booking a car and started admitting she was hoping it would be his. He'd started parking a block early so he could watch, unseen, as she jogged toward the car with her badge still clipped to her scrubs, and there was a tenderness in it that felt dangerously like the beginning of something neither of them had agreed to. "Can I ask you something?" she said one night, studying his face in the mirror the way you study a photograph you suspect has been altered. "You don't drive like someone who's always driven for a living." His hands tightened, almost imperceptibly, on the wheel. "What do you mean?" "You check your mirrors like you're used to being followed," she said. "And your hands," she nodded at them. "They're too clean for someone who works nights in a car. No calluses. No grease under the nails." For the first time since she'd met him, Min said nothing at all. The silence stretched long enough that she almost apologized for asking. Then he said quietly, "Everybody's running from something, Amara. I just haven't decided yet whether I'm running toward something better, or away from something worse." It should have scared her. Didn't. It made her want to know more, which, as anyone who has ever loved a man with a locked door in his chest can tell you, is exactly how the trouble always starts. 3,000 miles away, in a glass office on the 42nd floor of Kong Tower in Seoul, a woman named Saran Cho was reviewing a shipping contract when her phone buzzed with a message from a private investigator she had put on retainer 2 weeks earlier, the day Min-jun disappeared. The message contained one photograph, grainy, taken through a car window at night, of a black woman in blue scrubs laughing in the back seat of a sedan, and the words, "Found him. He's not sick. He's driving for strangers in Los Angeles. And he's not alone." Saran did not raise her voice. She never did. She simply set down her pen, looked at the photograph a second time, and said to no one in particular in the empty office, "That's inconvenient." Because Saran Cho was not simply Min-jun's fiancée in the arrangement, his father had built like a merger. She was the one who had orchestrated the deal that would collapse along with $3 billion of family debt, hidden from the board the instant Min-jun failed to marry her by the end of the fiscal quarter. She needed him compliant. She needed him back in Seoul, smiling for cameras, saying yes at an altar he'd never chosen. She did not need a nurse in Los Angeles giving him ideas about a life he was allowed to want. If this story is already keeping you on the edge of your seat, this is the part where I ask you to comment where you're watching from tonight, and like this video if you can already feel that something bigger is coming. Because something was. 2 weeks in, Min-jun did something he had never once done in the 4 months he'd been driving strangers through the city. He asked to see Amara again, off the clock, off the app, as himself, or at least, as much of himself as he'd learned to be. He picked a small Ethiopian restaurant 2 blocks from her apartment, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and an owner who called every guest Habibi regardless of background, and he wore a jacket that had come from a thrift store instead of a tailor, because some part of him understood, without being told, that if he showed up looking like what he actually was, he would lose the only thing in his life that had ever felt unconditional. "I need to tell you something," he said, halfway through the meal, and his voice had changed, steadier, older, like a mask sliding half an inch and revealing something underneath. "My name isn't just Min." Amara set down her fork. "Bae, I'm not just a driver." "I kind of figured," she said with a small, careful smile, "the kind you give someone when you're bracing for news that might change everything. Are you in some kind of trouble?" "I'm in a kind of cage," he said. "I just built it myself, and I've been trying to find the door." She didn't press. That was the thing about Amara that undid him. She had spent her whole life learning not to demand more from people than they could safely give, because her mother's mind had taught her, cruelly, that some truths arrive only when they're ready. So she reached across the table, took his scarred, unfamiliar hand, and said, "Whenever you find that door, I hope you let yourself walk through it." He almost told her everything that night. He got as far as, "My family has a company," before his phone lit up on the table between them, a Seoul number, 3 a.m. there, which meant an emergency here. He answered. He listened. His face went the color of ash. "I have to go," he said, standing so fast his chair nearly toppled. "Amara, I'm sorry." "Go," she said. "Oh." She didn't know that the call was from his father's chief of staff, informing him that his father had suffered a stroke on the boardroom floor 40 minutes earlier, and that the board led quietly, patiently, by Saran Cho had already begun drafting an emergency succession statement that would require Min-jun's return to Seoul within 72 hours, and his marriage within 30 days. Or the family would lose controlling interest in the very company his grandfather had built with his hands. She only knew that the man she was falling for had run out into the rain without his coat, and that some instinct older than good sense told her she might not see him again. She was wrong. She would see him again in 4 days. She would just barely recognize him when she did. Because when Kang Min-jun returned to Los Angeles that final time, he was no longer wearing a hoodie. He stepped out of a black car that wasn't the one she'd learned to listen for, wearing a suit that fit him like a second skin he'd forgotten how to shed, flanked by 2 men whose jackets sat too structured to be anything but security, and Amara standing on her cracked front steps with Zuri's hand in hers felt something in her chest fold in on itself like paper. "You're the driver," she said, and it came out sounding like an accusation, though what she meant was closer to a plea. "Please still be the driver. Please still be him." "I am," Min-jun said, stepping closer, his eyes never leaving her face. "I'm also the reason a woman in Seoul is telling my board right now that I've been hiding a mistress in Los Angeles and that I'm unfit to inherit anything at all." Zuri tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, is he a prince?" Min-jun crouched to Zuri's eye level, something loosening in his shoulders for the first time since he'd stepped out of the car. "Something like that," he said gently. "But your mom's the one who's actually royal. I just have better tailors." Amara didn't laugh. She was too busy trying to breathe around the sighs of what had just landed in her front yard. "You lied to me." "I never lied," he said. "I just didn't finish the sentence." "That's the same thing, Min." "It's not the same thing," he said, "and I think you know that because you never once asked me the one question that would have told you everything." She went still. "What question?" "You never asked my last name." She hadn't. In 3 weeks, in 6 rides, in 1 dinner where he'd almost told her the truth, it had never once occurred to her to ask, because she hadn't been building a case file on him, she'd been building trust. One small, unremarkable kindness at a time, the way you build anything that's meant to last. "It's Kang," he said quietly. "Kang Min-jun. And in about 4 days, a woman who has never loved me is going to force me to marry her in front of 300 cameras. Unless I can prove to my family's board that I'm not the reckless, broken heir they think I am." "And how exactly," Amara said, arms crossing, voice shaking in a way she hated, "were you planning to prove that?" Min-jun looked at her the way a man looks at the only solid ground left in a collapsing building. "I was hoping," he said, "you'd help me. If you've made it this far, take a second to like this video and drop a comment telling me what you would do in Amara's position, because what happens next is going to test both of them in ways neither one saw coming." She said no. Of course she said no. What sane woman, raising a daughter alone, caring for a fading mother, working double shifts to keep the lights honest, would agree to walk into a war between a Seoul boardroom and a woman who had investigators watching her apartment window? She told him to leave. She told Zuri to go inside. She stood on those cracked steps with her arms wrapped around herself long after his car had disappeared down the block, and she cried the kind of tears that come not from heartbreak but from the unbearable, familiar ache of almost. But grief has a way of loosening what fear holds shut, and that night, after Zuri was asleep, Amara sat beside her mother's bed at the care facility, holding a hand that sometimes forgot to hold back, and her mother, in one of the rare lucid windows that arrived less and less often now, looked at her daughter and said, without context, without explanation, the way dementia sometimes hands back exactly the right sentence at exactly the wrong time, "Don't let fear pick for you, baby. I let fear pick for 30 years. Look what it cost me." Amara sat with that a long time. She called him back 2 days later. Not because she wanted the money, or the tabloids, or the life that came stitched to his name. She made that clear before she said another word. She called because somewhere between the coffee he remembered and the coat he'd forgotten, she had started imagining a future, and she was done letting fear pick for her. "I'll help you," she said. "But I need to know what I'm walking into." What she was walking into was Saran Cho. The gala took place 6 days later in a ballroom on the 40th floor of the Kong Tower's Los Angeles satellite office, a room built entirely of glass, so that the city glittered beneath it like something you could fall into if you weren't careful. Amara stood at the edge of it in a dress Min-jun's assistant had chosen, feeling like an intruder in her own skin, when Saran Cho approached her with a smile so precise it looked machined. You must be the nurse, Saran said, the word landing with surgical contempt. How refreshing. Min-jun always did have a taste for charity. I'm not a charity case, Amara said evenly. I'm a person who happened to notice him when nobody else was looking. How touching, Saran said. Enjoy the evening. It's the last one you'll spend in this circle. She smiled again, warmer this time, which was somehow worse. Oh, and do tell your daughter congratulations. 6 is such a lovely age to learn that some fairy tales end before the wedding. Amara's blood went cold. Saran knew about Zuri. Saran had been watching Zuri. That was the moment the story stopped being a romance and became something closer to a hostage negotiation, because within the hour, Amara would discover through a trembling, tearful phone call from her sister that a black car had idled outside Zuri's school pickup that afternoon, that a woman matching no one they knew had asked the front office for Amara Bankole by name, and had been turned away only because the vice principal insisted on parental verification. Somebody had tried to get close to her daughter. And across that glittering ballroom, under lights worth more than her yearly salary, Amara Bankole understood with total clarity that she was no longer just falling for a man. She was standing in the blast radius of a war for a company worth billions, and the people fighting it had just shown her exactly how far they were willing to go. If your stomach just dropped the way mine did, hit subscribe now, because we are about to enter the most intense part of this story, and I promise you nothing that's happened so far will prepare you for what comes next. Min-jun found her by the window, phone still shaking in her hand, and when she told him what had happened at Zuri's school, something in his face went from composed to lethal in under 3 seconds. Not loud, not dramatic, just a stillness that made 2 nearby board members instinctively step back. She will never come near your daughter again, he said, and it wasn't a promise. It was a fact he intended to make true with his own hands if necessary. You can't guarantee that, Amara said. You've been gone from this world for 4 months, Min. She's had 4 months to build whatever this is. She's had 4 months, he agreed. But she's made one mistake tonight that she can't undo. He looked past Amara, toward the center of the ballroom, where his father's board sat in a loose semicircle, waiting for the succession announcement that was supposed to end with Saran Cho on his arm. She threatened a child to control me. That's not boardroom strategy, Amara. That's a felony. And I know exactly who filmed the security footage outside that school, because I hired him myself the day I found out she'd put investigators on you. For a moment, Amara couldn't speak. You knew. You knew she was watching me, and you didn't tell me? I didn't want you carrying weight that wasn't yours to carry, he said, and even as the words left him, he seemed to hear how hollow they sounded against the fear still shaking in Amara's hands. That was wrong. I see that now. I kept trying to protect you the way I've been protected my whole life by controlling what you were allowed to know. It never once occurred to me that it's exactly what made me so easy to lie to. It was, in its own strange way, the twist the whole story had been building toward. Not that Min-jun was secretly rich, everyone in that ballroom already understood that, but that the very instinct that had made him fall for Amara in the first place, his hunger for a life where nothing needed to be managed or hidden, had made him hide the one thing that could have kept her safe. If you go back through everything he'd said in that car, I asked how your day was. I'm not always running toward something better. I just haven't decided the signs were always there. He had never been protecting her from himself. He had been protecting her from what loving him would eventually cost. The board chairman's voice rang out across the ballroom then, amplified, formal, final. Mr. Kang, we require your answer. Will you honor the succession agreement and confirm your engagement tonight, or forfeit your position as CEO? Every camera in that glass room turned toward him. Every phone lifted. Saran Cho stood beside the podium with a serene, patient smile of a woman who had already won, because she believed correctly, based on everything he had ever been raised to be, that Min-jun would choose the company his grandfather built with bleeding hands over a nurse from a neighborhood with a broken porch light. Min-jun walked to the podium. He did not look at Saran. He looked at Amara, standing at the edge of the crowd with her sister's terrified voice still echoing in her ear. Her daughter safe but shaken 3 miles away. And he understood, standing there under all that glass and all that money, that he had spent 34 years being the most powerful man in every room he entered and the least free man in every relationship he'd ever had. I'll give you my answer, he said into the microphone, but first I want the board to see something. He gestured, and on the screen behind him, the one meant to display a wedding announcement footage began to play instead. Grainy security video from outside Zuri's elementary school, timestamped that afternoon, showing a woman in a gray coat asking for a 6-year-old girl by name, being turned away by a suspicious vice principal, and getting into a car registered, according to the DMV records displayed beneath it, to Saran Cho. Gasps rippled through the ballroom like wind through glass. This woman, Min-jun said, voice carrying now, cold and clear, attempted to approach a child in order to pressure me into a marriage that exists only to hide $3 billion in debt she structured behind this board's back. I have the documents, I have the wire transfers, and I have 4 months of my life that finally taught me the difference between people who want something from me and people who simply wanted to know how my day was. Emotional moment aside, if this story is hitting you the way it's hitting me, comment your thoughts below and give this video a like. We are almost at the end, but the biggest reveal is still ahead of us. Saran Cho's composure did not break so much as it dissolved, piece by piece, in front of 300 witnesses and their phones. You cannot prove. I can, Min-jun said, and I already have. My legal team filed the fraud disclosure with the board an hour ago. What you're watching right now isn't a scandal, Ms. Cho. It's a resignation. Security approached her not with force, but with the quiet, absolute finality of people who had been waiting years for permission. She was escorted out through a side door beneath a chandelier she had once called, in an unguarded moment months earlier, the most beautiful thing money could buy, and no one in that room, watching her go, disagreed with the appraisal or missed the point. The board chairman cleared his throat into the silence she left behind. Mr. Kang. Given these revelations, the succession agreement is void. The board will require a new nominee for CEO by end of quarter. Nominate my cousin, Min-jun said simply. He's wanted this since we were children, and unlike me, he's never once needed to disappear to remember who he is. The room did not know what to do with a billionaire willingly stepping off his own throne. Amara, standing at the edge of it all, didn't either, not until he crossed the ballroom floor toward her, past the murmuring board and the abandoned podium, and knelt not with a ring, not yet, but with something quieter. I don't know what I am anymore, he said, taking her hands. I'm not the CEO. I'm not really the driver, either. That was never sustainable, and we both knew it. But 4 months ago, in the back of a car in the rain, you asked me nothing and expected nothing, and for the first time in my adult life, somebody looked at me like I was already enough. I don't want to build the next version of my life on a lie, Amara. I want to build it with someone who already saw the truth before I could say it out loud. Amara looked down at him, this man who had lied by omission, who had endangered her daughter without meaning to, who had also remembered how she took her coffee on a night nobody else in her life remembered anything at all, and she thought about her mother's voice in that quiet room, "Don't let fear pick for you," and she thought about Zuri, safe now, sleeping soundly 3 miles away because a stranger who loved her mother had made sure of it, and she made a choice that had nothing to do with billions of dollars and everything to do with 4 months of small, unglamorous kindnesses that had never once asked to be repaid. "Okay," she said softly. "But Min, if we do this, there's no more unfinished sentences. Ever. No more," he agreed. "I promise you the whole sentence, every time, for the rest of my life." 6 months later, Amara Bankole still worked her nursing shifts, though now by choice instead of necessity, because she had learned the hard way, in a glass ballroom under a chandelier that had swallowed a woman's ambitions whole, that a life built entirely around someone else's money was no safer than a life built around nothing at all. Her mother had good days and hard days still, but she had them now in a care facility with proper staff and proper time, paid for not as an act of rescue but as an act of partnership, because Min-jun had learned, in turn, that love wasn't a transaction to be managed from a distance. It was a sentence you finished together, out loud, in front of everyone, even when it cost you a company your grandfather built with his own hands. Zuri, for her part, still believed Min-jun was something like a prince. Nobody in that family ever really corrected her. Before we close this story out, if it moved you even a little, subscribe, share it with someone who needs a reminder that real love doesn't announce itself with money, and tell me in the comments the biggest lesson you're taking with you tonight. Because if there is one thing this story leaves behind, long after the glass ballroom and the billion-dollar boards and the woman who mistook fear for control, it's this: The people who truly see you rarely arrive dressed like it. Sometimes they show up in a gray hoodie, driving 10 miles under the speed limit in the rain, asking nothing more than how your day was, and sometimes, the bravest thing you will ever do is stop waiting for someone to prove they're safe and simply let them.